From Atari to Nintendo to Sony, the video game world had always been meant for kids. Even as violence and gore in gaming increased with games like Mortal Kombat and Doom, the target demographic was always skewed young. But by the early 2000s, as gamers grew older, the age of the average player had risen enough for a change in game design philosophy. The market had grown to the point where it could tolerate, and in fact desire, mature and adult content in gaming. There was a revolution in the making, if only somebody could get it started. And in 2001, one upstart company founded by unknowns with little gaming experience dared to kick it off, and in doing so became the flag bearer for a new era of gaming and gamers. In so doing, they have become one of the most successful, recognizable, and controversial names in the entire gaming market. A powerhouse force of innovation and bravado that has changed the course of a medium and redefined what an art form was capable of. Two kids from England may never have become the musicians they wanted to be, but that didn't stop them from becoming their own kind of rock star. Growing up, Sam and Dan Houser always wanted to be rock and roll gods. But at some point, the two boys from London got exposed to an American import, hip-hop. It quickly became their new inspiration, a musical style that, like rock, was equal parts look, sound, and style that somehow consolidated into one way of life. It was a philosophy that the brothers took to heart, one that would define their later works. Once they finished school, the pair dove straight for their dream and joined major music label BMG in London. Unfortunately, real jobs didn't look like music videos. Their work was dull and boring. Sam and Dan quickly found that being in the heart of the music industry was a far cry from being stars in their own right. As with so many hopeful youths, it looked like reality might kill the dream. But then in 1993, BMG did something unexpected. Cashing in on the gaming craze, it started an interactive division based right out of London, and they wanted young, hip kids to drive it. Starving for more creative freedom, Sam and Dan jumped on board knowing absolutely nothing about programming or game making. Perhaps it was no real surprise then that BMG Interactive's library of work was not exactly stellar, and sales didn't exactly rival BMG's music division. And then, from the unlikeliest place imaginable, the Houser brothers met the crew with whom they'd shake the industry. DMA Design from Central Scotland were famous for creating the Lemmings series of games. Clearly kids' fare, but also imbued with a dark sense of humor. DMA now had an idea for a different kind of game, a top-down driver with a punk sensibility called Race and Chase. The 2D game would be a fairly basic racer, but would feature carjackings, thugs, mafiosos, police, and innocent bystanders just waiting for a whacking. Any and all of these were potential victims for the player, making the otherwise simplistic title far more adult than others on the market. The game also lacked something every other game had: specific goals. Instead, the title would be an open world with lots of options. There were in fact 3 worlds to choose from: Liberty City, which was clearly New York, Vice City, which was clearly Miami, and San Andreas, which was clearly San Francisco. It would be up to the player to decide what he wanted to do in it. If he failed, he wouldn't get a game over screen or restart a level. Instead, he'd simply lose his weapons and then go off to do whatever he wanted, again. If he hit a part that was too hard or that he didn't like, he wouldn't be stuck with it. He'd simply try something totally different. The Housers were blown away. They recognized the potential for a groundbreaking new kind of game, based not off of objectives, but off of player choice in a deep, varied world. They agreed to publish the game, and DMA set off to work. It ended up taking longer than anticipated, nearly 30 months. The freeform nature of the game, which made it so appealing, also made it difficult to code and harder to test. The simple title became a high-risk gamble. But at last, Race and Chase released in 1997, under a new name, Grand Theft Auto. Critics praised it for all the same reasons the Housers had, and it went on to be a success by the standards of BMG Interactive. Sadly, BMG's standards weren't that high. 2 million units was nothing to scoff at, but despite GTA's high-octane performance, the publisher was floundering. Their corporate overlords wanted to cut them loose. Meanwhile, in New York, another struggling upstart publisher was looking for fresh blood. Take-Two Interactive wanted to be making darker, edgier games, but thus far hadn't found any success. But recognizing that the guys from London had a vibe and a style just looking for an outlet, Take-Two bought BMG's interactive division. The brothers who'd grown up listening to New York hip-hop were about to move to the Big Apple. They'd been given a budget and the creative freedom to do whatever they wanted. If they played their cards right, they knew this could just be their big break. All they needed was a name for their new venture. In homage to their original dream, they called their new publishing house Rockstar. In the mid-90s, major music label BMG decided they'd try their hand at the video game market. They opened an interactive division in their London offices where two young employees, Sam and Dan Houser, were looking for a creative outlet. They jumped at the chance to head the new division and quickly published a number of minor titles. But when DMA Design in Scotland approached them with a new idea, a free-form game that would allow gamers to do whatever they wanted, whenever they wanted, the Housers knew they had a hit on their hands. Grand Theft Auto would go on to be BMG Interactive's biggest hit, but it wasn't enough to save the division. BMG spun it off to upstart publisher Take-Two Interactive in New York. The brothers and their crew moved to New York City with the task of making a brand that would be synonymous with edgy, adult, groundbreaking gaming. And so, Rockstar Games was created. The only question was, could it deliver on the promise of Grand Theft Auto? Though Rockstar was technically a different company from BMG Interactive, all the top people were the same, including the Housers. Continuing the relationships they had formed, they reached back out to DMA Design and got to work on Grand Theft Auto 2. The brothers remained an integral creative force in the title's development, helping keep the tone of the game focused and consistent. The result released in 1999 and, like its predecessor, sold well. It was largely the same game, though this time around it did feature factional gang warfare that the player could influence any way he wanted. Like GTA 1, GTA 2 ended up selling about 2 million units worldwide. Meanwhile, Rockstar reached out to other talent as well, publishing games like Midnight Club and Smuggler's Run. These too sold well. The new venture was doing alright. Nevertheless, the Rockstar crew had bigger ambitions than just doing alright. Rockstar wanted to push the boundaries of what games aspired to be, and in doing so, attract audiences who normally didn't play video games. They wanted to break away from the stigma that only nerds played games. They wanted their products to be as cool as hip-hop. To do that, they'd have to break away from the science fiction and fantasy trappings of most games and produce something that was both realistic and escapist at the same time. Of all the companies they worked with, they knew that DMA had hit closest to this mark with their Grand Theft Auto series. So, to make the next GTA game bigger, better, and grander than the earlier titles, the Housers decided to dive headfirst into it. This time, they would not be making the same game with updated graphics. They'd be crafting their magnum opus. Sam became the director and producer of the new game, while Dan became the head writer. Where previous Grand Theft Autos had been barely narrative 2D drivers, this next game would be a character-driven, darkly comic saga of mobsters and mafiosos in 3 dimensions. This would make for a much more expensive game than others in the series, but Rockstars aren't made by playing it safe. Following on from its predecessors, the game would have a free-form style in an open, realistic city. There would be a main story with its own quests, but the gamer could choose to ignore it and go to any of hundreds of side quests, or ignore those too, and just go crazy on his own in one of the largest game worlds ever made. Far from yet another super soldier in space, this character would let gamers feel like an unrestrained street thug in the real world, a guy who could do all the things we'd love to try if only there were no consequences. And in a virtual world, there weren't. The end result was gleefully violent without any sort of moral compass. There was a wanted meter that would go up as the player committed more crimes, but since a high meter only drew more cops with better vehicles, that wasn't really a bad thing. Though the city was realistic, the gameplay was not. The driving mechanic was built more for the fun factor than anything approaching realism, and the quests themselves were more like a hybrid between the seedy underworld and the absurd. This was a world where jacking a police car was commonplace, and jacking a tank was even possible. Now that gives Grand Theft Auto a whole new meaning. It would also be one of the first games to make heavy use of a licensed soundtrack. The title featured several fake radio stations that played real-world songs, lending the game a further air of authenticity amidst its crazy antics. The story would bring the gamer deep into the underbelly of modern society, brought to life with top-notch voice acting and believable dialogue. The title dared to deal with adult issues like drugs, prostitution, and organized crime, much heavier fare than other games tried for. It would easily be the most adult game ever made, a twisted and sordid crime epic that enjoyed itself far too much. The combination of real-world environments and way over-the-top gameplay proved to be irresistible. Finally, there was a way for gamers to vent all those actions that society didn't allow, from running red lights, to running into cars, to running from the cops, to having the cops run from you. Grand Theft Auto 3 was an instant mega smash upon its release.
I'm proud of you, my boy. You kicked the shit out of those greaseballs.
It was heralded as one of the most groundbreaking games in years, and to this day it is seen as a watershed moment in the art form's history. Its adult content and themes revolutionized how games were perceived, and whole new audiences who had never been interested in geeky video games bought PlayStation 2s to play Grand Theft Auto. Coming so early in the Sony console's release cycle, GTA was a large contributor to the PS2's early lead in the console war, a position it held throughout that entire generation. So strong was GTA's influence that Sony paid Take-Two to keep the franchise PlayStation exclusive, at least for a couple of years. But the popularity came with its own problems. Though there were plenty of other violent games on the market, for whatever reason, politicians singled this one out as their new whipping boy. Australia even refused to rate it, effectively banning the title in that country. Also, a then unknown Florida lawyer and anti-gaming activist, Jack Thompson, claimed that the game was responsible for a 2003 teen murder in Ohio, kicking off a long line of Jack Thompson court battles that often involved Rockstar. But despite all their best efforts at keeping the game down, nothing drives sales like controversy. Grand Theft Auto was the new rock and roll. When publisher Take-Two Interactive bought BMG's interactive division, they weren't getting a lot of high-selling titles. The one franchise that showed some promise was a top-down 2D driver, Grand Theft Auto. As the BMG veterans founded their new studio, Rockstar Games, they looked to reinvent the nerdy industry into a cultural icon, betting the farm that GTA could make gaming cool. The result was 2001's Grand Theft Auto 3, a game aimed squarely at mature audiences. Tackling everything from murder to drugs to carjacking, it violently went against the grain and drew the ire of parents and politicians alike. Needless to say, it was the best-selling game of the year. Rockstar now had the money and prestige to do whatever they wanted. And what they wanted was to push their luck right to the hilt. Just before GTA 3 had released in October 2001, developer Remedy delivered Max Payne to the PC. Rockstar immediately saw the potential for the series since its dark, adult twist on gaming was in line with their own ambitions. And so, Rockstar purchased the Max Payne IP outright and ported the game to consoles in December of 2001. That made for 2 hit games in only 2 months. The publisher had shot straight to the top. Which didn't mean that everything they touched turned to gold. In early 2002, they released State of Emergency, a riot game about an urban uprising against the establishment. While it nominally adhered to GTA's anarchic style, the game had all of the freeform and none of the focus. The title bombed commercially. It didn't faze them in the least. Knowing that GTA was their greatest asset and that only Scottish developer DMA Design could be trusted with the phenomenon, Rockstar bought the studio in 2002. DMA was now Rockstar North. And they already had a game in the works. They opted to push out a new GTA as quickly as possible, only barely updating the old engine. But there would be no danger of treading old ground, because GTA was traveling back in time. Taking healthy inspiration from 80s icons like Miami Vice and Scarface, it took the over-the-top hyper-stylization of GTA 3 and shot it to Florida, 1986. Based off of Vice City from the original Grand Theft Auto, this city would be positively drenched in neon, pastels, bad tans, and coked-out mobsters. Rockstar's signature attention to atmosphere would be present in spades, with Rockstar founders Sam and Dan Houser personally making sure that everything in the game adhered to one aesthetic. And that aesthetic was 80s camp to the nth degree. But the Housers still wanted to be pushing the boundaries of what games should strive for. For their vocal talent, Rockstar assembled an all-star cast, including Ray Liotta as the lead character, Dennis Hopper, James Woods, Peter Fonda, and who else but Jenna Jameson. The stigma that video games weren't respectable work for an actor was starting to fade. The game was even more ridiculous than its precursor, but featured the same insane attention to every last detail. Gameplay-wise, it was largely the same, but with more vehicles, weapons, and missions than ever before. It also added in a real estate economy that gamers could use to become legitimate land barons. Though of course being legit in GTA's world was next to impossible. Despite all the uproar over GTA 3's violence, the follow-up would still have players beating up cops and civilians alike. Meanwhile, Rockstar started plastering posters all over cities around the world, a marketing tactic usually reserved for music acts. Not content to break new ground in the game itself, this title would herald a whole new age of gaming promotion. It immediately gave Grand Theft Auto a certain street cred and cultural status no game had even attempted before. You're just not a Rockstar if you follow the rules. Grand Theft Auto Vice City released in October 2002, and once again sold like gangbusters. It did generate some more controversy from media watchdogs, upset about the developer's refusal to tone down the themes. They could have backed off and gone the safe route at this point. They didn't. Rockstar North decided to take a break from jacking cars so that they could focus on the murdering. 2003 would see the release of Manhunt, one of the most wantonly violent games ever produced. It followed an executed felon who was saved from death by a psychotic director who wanted to film him killing wave after wave of gangsters. But really, what the game was about was bloody, bloody murder. Over and over and over again. It featured some of the most gruesome, detailed, and grotesque animations ever rendered. But that wasn't enough for Rockstar. Oh no. Before the title's release, Rockstar upped the ante again by sending an actual barbed wire garrote to journalists reviewing the game. Once again, the shock value wouldn't be limited to the game itself. Of course, such a thing couldn't come out without a backlash. The game was banned in New Zealand, effectively banned in Australia, confiscated in Munich, and blamed for a teen murder in the UK, although it was later revealed that it was actually the victim who played the game. But once again, controversy did nothing to slow sales. It may not have been Grand Theft Auto, but Manhunt still became an iconic title that helped define Rockstar as the counterculture brand of the new millennium. With all the fame and attention, the Housers were rumored to let it all go to their heads, routinely insulting and degrading their own employees. But despite their soaring egos, they never lost their focus on even the most microscopic details in their games. If they thought of themselves as the peak of the gaming world, at least they kept earning the title. And they'd earn it again in 2004 with the best-selling theft of them all. When Rockstar Games was founded in 1998, they didn't have any hit franchises to their name. But Rockstar's founders Sam and Dan Houser had worked with DMA Design on their Grand Theft Auto games. The Housers sensed that the franchise was a revolution in the making, if only they could get the right elements together. They hit the mark dead on with their 2001 sequel, Grand Theft Auto 3, one of the best-selling and most influential games of all time. Rockstar expanded exponentially, buying up both studios around the world and hit IPs like Max Payne. But no matter what they did, they always came back to their standard bearer, GTA. As 2004 rolled around the corner, it would bring with it everything that made Rockstar what it was: creative experiments, a monster success, and a controversy so large its repercussions can still be felt to this day. As if the gaming world couldn't contain them anymore, 2004 saw the release of Rockstar's first movie. Back in 1999, they'd made a short film to help promote Grand Theft Auto 2, but now they were going for the big screen. The Football Factory was a British film about English hooligans, executive produced by Rockstar Games. Not surprisingly, a hardcore football club movie didn't gain much traction outside of England itself. Nonetheless, as a glorification of the hyper-violent counterculture, it was a perfect fit for the gaming bad boys. But at the end of the day, they were still a game publisher, and they had plenty to do. In May 2004, they released the first game of a brand new franchise, one of the few set in the Wild West, Red Dead Revolver. The title was originally developed by Angel Studios for Japanese publisher Capcom, but after a few delays and production woes, Capcom gave up on the title, assuming it would never be finished. However, Rockstar knew the company had talent since they'd worked together on Midnight Club and Smuggler's Run. And so they bought the studio, rebranding it Rockstar San Diego. But when Rockstar acquired them, their Western game was a mess. While all the various parts of the game, including duels and a bullet time mechanic, were good ideas, its polish wasn't up to the level they needed to be. More importantly, they didn't cohere into one seamless experience, which had always been Rockstar's greatest strength. When it did finally hit shelves, it was praised for perfectly recalling spaghetti westerns of old, but was faulted for having a flawed execution. Appropriately enough, the game was something of an imperfect anti-hero. But Rockstar's primary focus for the year wouldn't be the Wild West, but the West Coast. In October 2004, they released their biggest, boldest, and baddest game yet, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas.
I'm taking you all down, bitches!
I want you to pay him a little visit, Carl, and destroy all his evidence before he testifies.
Sort this out, Carl, so Officer Tenpenny can sleep easy at night.
Though San Andreas had appeared in the very first GTA as a stand-in for San Francisco, in this title it would be expanded into an entire state that had 3 cities within it, parodies of Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Las Vegas. Like Vice City before it, San Andreas would feature a top-tier cast, including the BAMF himself, Samuel L. Jackson.
Intimidate those who intimidate others, Carl. It's my job.
It included even more weapons and vehicles than before, and even had a physical fitness system. If you didn't eat right and exercise, your character would get fat and ugly. A little lesson for the audience amidst all the chaos. But the biggest change was the game's sheer bigness. An entire state, 3 whole cities, and all the endless deserts in between made for one of the largest game worlds ever made. Grand Theft Auto was larger than life. The game would also generate Rockstar's second film, a documentary about the lowrider culture of Southern California called Sunday Driver. The film was included with the special edition of San Andreas. Reviews were glowing and the hype was rabid. Sales went through the stratosphere. San Andreas went on to be the highest-selling game in the history of both the United States and Europe. Rockstar was untouchable. What could possibly go wrong? Sony had paid Rockstar's owners Take-Two to make the GTA franchise exclusive to the PlayStation 2 for a limited time. So, 9 months after San Andreas released on the PS2, it came to the PC and Xbox. The PC version, like its predecessors, allowed for modding from the community. Only 2 days after the PC version's release in America, and a day before its release in Europe, a Dutch modder named Patrick Wildenberg released a patch for the PC game. This patch literally changed only 1 bit of the game's main file. But by doing so, Wildenborg made a hidden section of the game's code available, a fully interactive sex minigame that he called Hot Coffee. For their own reasons, Rockstar had decided not to allow the sex game to players. However, by the time this decision was made, the game was next to done. Untangling the minigame's code from the rest of the project would have taken both time and resources they couldn't waste. So instead, they had opted to keep the code and just make it inaccessible. They'd never considered that modders might find it. Within days, the Hot Coffee mod had become a media firestorm. The extreme brutal violence of Manhunt was fine, but the idea that a game had sex was absolutely unacceptable. The ESRB re-rated the game from mature to adults only. Since major retailers refuse to carry an adults-only game, and Microsoft and Sony won't allow one on their consoles, Rockstar was forced to recall the game at a cost of $25 million. And if that wasn't enough, the US government decided they needed to save America's children from the publisher. Hillary Clinton declared it was, quote, stealing the innocence of our children. In 2005, she joined Senators Joe Lieberman and Evan Bayh to introduce the Family Entertainment Protection Act, which would federally enforce the ESRB rating system. The bill never went to a vote. On top of all of this, class action lawsuits were brought against Take-Two by angry parents incensed that the publisher had hidden porn in their children's games. Never mind the fact that no one under the age of 17 should be playing the M-rated game, and never mind that the content was supposed to be inaccessible. It was the publisher's fault for including sex. After years of legal back and forth, the case was finally settled in 2009. Rockstar traditionally reveled in their bad boy status, but this was too much even for them. They have refused to ever discuss Hot Coffee again, and while their games are still as violent as ever, there's no sex to be found. Some claim that the scandal would be the end of Rockstar as they knew it, that the controversy would drive consumers away from their products. But they forgot that controversy was Rockstar's killer app. Since its founding in 1998, video game publisher Rockstar had earned a reputation as the bad boy of the electronic world. With its signature Grand Theft Auto series, it had helped drive games into more mature territory and turned the nerdy medium into a mainstream hit. With Grand Theft Auto San Andreas in 2004, they had one of the biggest hits in the history of gaming. But all their good momentum came crashing down around them when a modder discovered a hidden portion of the game and released it to the world. The Hot Coffee fiasco turned parents and politicians against the developer, with a whole host of lawsuits filed against the publisher. Suddenly, their bad boy reputation didn't look so hot. And while they never shied away from titles that pushed the boundaries of acceptability, for the next few years, Rockstar would set out to prove that even they could go legit. When the Hot Coffee fiasco happened, Rockstar already had another controversial game in the works. One of their subdivisions, Rockstar Toronto, was tasked with doing Rockstar's first movie tie-in. The catch? The movie was 26 years old. As a violent urban warfare movie, The Warriors dovetailed nicely into Rockstar's view of the world, and since it already had a built-in cult audience, Rockstar figured it would be a safe bet. Naturally, the bloody game that followed only further cemented the publisher as terrible souls trying to corrupt the world's youth. So it was with bated breath that everyone awaited Rockstar's next hyper-violent, super-sexual innocence stealer. And so in 2006, they announced table tennis. After the announcement, most people expected some sort of mature twist, but all they got was table tennis. The title would be Rockstar's first foray into the HD realm and their first chance to show off their San Diego studio's new Rockstar Advanced Game Engine, or Rage. To showcase the new powerhouse graphics afforded by Rage, they chose to make the best ping-pong simulator they could. Without any sense of satire or tongue-in-cheek cynicism, the game was a strong sports title that received good reviews from a surprised press. the bad boys had proved that they could make solid, family-friendly entertainment. Even Jack Thompson couldn't sue this one. To further convince people that they could make decent games for decent folks, later that same year, Rockstar published Booly from their Vancouver branch. Despite the title, the game actually pit gamers against the bullies, fighting back at them in typical youth prankster fashion, slingshots and wedgies, and the like. However, even though the game didn't feature anything more violent than a schoolyard fistfight, just by being a Rockstar game, especially one about school children, it became controversial. The ever-dependable Jack Thompson sued it for being a, quote, Columbine simulator. There was nothing in the actual game to be upset at. What the controversy proved was that the very name of Rockstar now held a meaning to the broader, non-gaming community. And just like rock and roll before it, it wasn't something older generations liked. But no amount of ping pong could change who they were. Rockstar was born to push boundaries, and they were about to go out of bounds. As early as 2004, they had tasked their Vienna branch with crafting a follow-up to the 2003 Grindhouse game, Manhunt. But for undisclosed reasons, they shut the Vienna studio down in 2006 with no warning. As the poor Austrians scrambled for new jobs, Manhunt 2 transferred to London, where Rockstar's new branch there finished the game in time for summer 2007. In June of that year, they sent the game out to be rated, as usual. But the result stunned them. The ultra-violent title, even by Rockstar standards, received an adults-only rating from the ESRB. While the game could still legally be sold in the United States, no console manufacturer allowed an AO game to be on its system, and no major retailer allowed an AO game on their shelves. So, while technically legal, it was effectively banned in the United States. And that was just the US. In the United Kingdom and other countries around the world, the ban was official. If the publisher ever wanted to see a profit from the game, they'd have to tone it down. Rockstar was forced to censor their own game, removing some of the most violent parts and obscuring the rest. The result was still a twisted murder fest, but reined in enough to be allowed through the ratings process. It released in October 2007. After all the controversy, it received only middling reviews. But then, as with Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, hackers managed to unlock the offending portions of the game. But this time, the ESRB chose not to re-rate the game, stating that Rockstar had at least told them that the code was still in the game. Regardless, the uncensored version finally found its way to consumers in November of that year as a direct download for PCs. Also, Jack Thompson filed a lawsuit. Go figure. But at the end of the day, Manhunt was hardly Rockstar's primary focus. As always, their most important commodity was Grand Theft Auto. And after 4 years away from the spotlight, GTA was about to grab it back with a bang. Since its founding in 1998, Rockstar Games had been instrumental in driving the medium into more mature territory. With its signature Grand Theft Auto series, it introduced adult themes into a space that had once been just for kids. Needless to say, this brought with it its own share of controversy, but Rockstar took it in stride as they watched their sales soar. But all that came crashing down around them when in 2004, a hacker uncovered hidden code in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas for a sex minigame, Hot Coffee. The resulting political and legal backlash was the company's darkest hour, and for a few years afterwards, Rockstar went legit with friendlier titles like Table Tennis and Booly. But by 2007, the bad boys of the gaming world had waited long enough. Rockstar would be going back to what they did best. And they'd be doing it the best they'd ever done it. For their return to the world of stolen cars, Rockstar would be going HD. Their San Diego studio had created an in-house engine, the Rockstar Advanced Game Engine, or RAGE. Their newest Grand Theft Auto game would take RAGE and use it to construct the most detailed, accurate, and active city ever seen in a video game. And the city they'd be building was Liberty City, their parody version of New York. For all the many places their series had gone, Liberty City was always the one everything else was compared to, and it was the one setting that always took place in the modern day. The last time they'd gone there was Grand Theft Auto 3. Therefore, despite all the other games between them, this trip would be Grand Theft Auto 4. GTA 4 would bring with it some major changes to the franchise, some of which had nothing to do with the game itself. Every Grand Theft Auto before it had come to the PlayStation 2 first, and only later came to other platforms, a so-called timed exclusive. But this time, the game would hit both the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 simultaneously. On top of this, Microsoft then paid Rockstar between $50 to $75 million to give the 360 timed exclusives on any downloadable content they'd make for the game. The series that had helped launch the PlayStation 2 to the top of its class would now favor the Xbox. Indeed, the first time GTA 4 was ever announced to the world was at Microsoft's E3 2006 press conference, as a tattoo on Peter Moore's arm. Rockstar spared no expense on their baby. Though even he didn't know for sure, Rockstar North producer Leslie Benzies guessed the game cost $100 million, which would make it by far the most expensive game of all time. And when the rights holders to the song Walk the Night proved impossible to find, Rockstar hired a private investigator to find them. No stone would be left unturned to make Grand Theft Auto 4 the very best it could be. As usual, the new GTA was set to come out in October. However, due to technical issues with the next-gen consoles, they were forced to delay the game to spring 2008. While it wasn't what they wanted, it did help drive the game's hype to a fever pitch. After the hot coffee fiasco with San Andreas, there had been some question as to whether anybody wanted Grand Theft Auto anymore. The answer was absolutely yes.
I need money. This pays, and I'm good at it.
When the game finally did release on April 29th, 2008, it sold 3.6 million units by midnight. A week later, that number was up to 6 million for a total of $500 million in 7 days, the fastest-selling entertainment release in history. It became one of the highest-rated games of all time, often earning a perfect review score from the press. They'd done it again. GTA 4 followed the story of Niko Bellic, an Eastern European immigrant trying and failing to stay legit in Liberty City's seedy underworld. It was a sprawling crime epic that focused on the inner demons of its heroes, both grandiose and intimate at the same time. The tone was more sophisticated than previous titles, though tongue-in-cheek humor and over-the-top action were still in there. The city itself breathed with its own life. Citizens had their own schedules that unfolded with or without the player's intervention. GTA 4 was the most immersive experience Rockstar had ever made. And if that wasn't enough, they would also introduce multiplayer this time around, letting up to 16 players duke it out across the entire landscape. Combined with the epic story, it was a must-have combination. Except for Jack Thompson, who filed another lawsuit. It would be his last, since he would be disbarred later that year and forbidden from practicing law. Rockstar made no comment. But they weren't done with Liberty City yet. Having spent so much time making the city as deep and real as possible, they decided that for their new downloadable content, all they'd have to do was create a few new missions and characters and set them all in the same space. The results were almost full games in their own right, with their own huge storylines and well-drawn characters. The Lost and the Damned and the Ballad of Gay Tony. They are often cited as some of the finest examples of DLC on the market, and they were even packaged on a disc as episodes from Liberty City, so that even those not interested in Niko Bellic could play these titles. Rockstar's next big title came out of their San Diego studio, Red Dead Redemption.
What a pleasant surprise, Mr. Marston. We're the bad guys. We enforce the rules. Now, while the rules may not be perfect, the alternative is hell.
The title was first shown in early form at E3 2005 as a presentation in the PlayStation 3's world premiere. It was used to show off the PS3's power, a huge vote of confidence in the Rage engine from Sony. It took a little while to finish off the game since it didn't release until May 18th, 2010. But when it did, it brilliantly showcased Rockstar's signature attention to tone and detail, perfectly capturing the feel of a Western. While obviously in the same franchise as 2004's Red Dead Revolver, it did not follow the plot or any of the characters. Instead, redemption would take place at the very end of the Old West, in 1911, a period almost never visited in fiction. The massive areas in the game had both Wild West towns and all the expanses in between to explore. Reviews were absolutely stellar, with critics saying they had mapped the best parts of GTA into another world. Once again, they'd turned a so-so franchise into a monster success. But doing so didn't come cheap. It has been estimated that the game cost between $80 to $100 million to make. Twice in a row, Rockstar had spent more money on one title than any other publisher. And if that wasn't enough, they hired Western director John Hillcoat to make them a 30-minute machinima that aired on Fox. Clearly, they have no sense of limitation.
Hello, old friend. Been a long time.
Looking forward, Rockstar appears to be moving away from GTA, at least for the time being. Their next big titles are the long-awaited Max Payne 3 from the Vancouver studio and the PS3 exclusive Cold War game, Agent from Rockstar North. But no matter what they're working on, one thing they have achieved consistently is a pitch-perfect tone and style for each game, whether it's in the neon-drenched streets of Florida or the sweeping vistas of the Wild West. Their combination of mature themes, social commentary, and escapist fun have garnered them both hatred from media watchdogs and glowing praise from fans and critics. One way or the other, they have helped to change the face of the medium forever. And if the past is any indication, their best is yet to come.